There are new revelations from the latest release of the Giuffre Epstein files, and pressure is mounting on those once close with the convicted sex offender. Now, in the UK, the spotlight remains on the former Prince Andrew. There are new details on this now infamous photograph of deceased accuser Virginia Giuffre. She alleged that the two had multiple sexual encounters when she was a teenager. Andrew denied the claim and reached an out-of-court settlement with her in 2022. He also called into question the validity of the photo, but an email seemingly from Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell confirms the photo is real. And many people, including Epstein survivors, are now criticizing the U.S. Justice Department over this latest release of files, thousands of which identify victims. One of those critics is my next guest, Lisa Phillips in Los Angeles. She suffered years of Epstein's abuse, and she's also the host of the From Now On podcast, and it shares stories of survivors and champions advocacy. Thank you so much for making time for us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Arthi.
Now, Lisa, survivors had wanted transparency and had wanted the files to be released, but it's my understanding, but they wanted that not like this, with these improper redactions. What's the reaction been like?
Well, the law said all documents were to be released by a certain date, and no survivor names were to be disclosed. I will be at Pam Bondi's hearing with the House Judiciary next week because the DOJ has violated all three of the requirements in our bill. Number one, to this day, many important documents still haven't been disclosed. Number two, the date set for full release has long passed. And number three, the DOJ released the names of the survivors. The most important point here is they were supposed to redact the names and all the personal information of all the survivors, and they didn't do that. And I believe this was strategic and meant to be re-traumatizing and also punishing to put fear into the victims to stay silent.
You know, I also wanted to ask your reaction to what we've heard from UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He apologized to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein for his appointment of Peter Mandelson after revelations of the close ties with Epstein were made apparent in this latest release of documents. Does that apology feel like it goes far enough? And also to that point, we know that Mandelson is being investigated for sharing secrets, government secrets, but not necessarily, and we should make clear here that just because someone's name is mentioned in the files, it doesn't implicate wrongdoing, but there haven't been any investigations open to do with wrongdoing involving Epstein or any accusers. How does all of this sit with yourself and other survivors?
Well, I personally love to hear an apology because we don't get that in the US, for someone just to say, you know what, I apologize for how this has impacted your life. So I commend him on that. Regarding Mandelson, I've always said this whole files doesn't always have to do with sexual activity with minors. It also has to do with holding government secrets. And I'm not sure how guilty he is of that, but he has to answer to that. And I do hope that he does come to the U.S. and provides testimony on that. And also Prince Andrew, a former Prince Andrew, I hope that he does as well.
You know, we have, and you've listed some of them now, we have seen an extraordinary amount of powerful names that have been listed off in the course of these documents and the release of them. And again, I want to be clear here that a name being mentioned doesn't necessarily implicate wrongdoing, but certainly in our conversations with survivors prior to this release, there had been comments from survivors saying, the public will be extraordinarily shocked to learn of who had ties to Jeffrey Epstein, who may have been traveling with him or had connections with him, communicating with him. How do you think the public reaction has been to some of that?
Well, that was the whole reason why we were fighting. It wasn't just because of what we went through individually, but it was also because, you know, there's 1,200 survivors or more, and I personally know hundreds, and most of them don't speak out, but they have stories, and they have overlapping stories to ours. And we share a lot of information that has to do with not just people, but institutions that we brought forward. So there's a lot of information out there. We always knew it was going to be very dark and disturbing. My nervous system has not been the same since the last release. but it's necessary information to get out there that these powerful people, billionaires, elites, world leaders, a lot of them were up to no good. And so it does need to be exposed. I'm not quite sure how far people can be prosecuted, but I do believe that Congress needs to do something, and we need to keep going in this fight just to get answers.
You know, Lisa, finally, I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that is that you feel that it was deliberate to leave those names, some of the victims' names, in the documents rather than redacting them as they perhaps should have been. You said that this was meant to re-traumatize those victims. Of course, you are one of those individuals who suffered from Epstein's abuse. I want to know personally, how were you feeling when you took in those documents, when you see all of these discussions take place? How do you cope with that? How do you feel about it now?
Well, when it comes to the files being released and this whole journey for myself, I try to remove the emotional part of it because it's very personal, but I try to stick to the facts. And the facts are, you know, Todd Blanche stood up there and said, you know, this is over. This is all that's going to be released, and that nobody can be held accountable. But in that release, there was tons of names. There was a lot of information that people can connect the dots, and there's a lot of powerful people that are being highlighted right now for wrongdoing. And I like the fact that a lot of this information is coming out there because there's so many men for the last 10, 20 years have said, I've had nothing to do with Epstein, you know, and things are coming out now. There's tons of emails, hundreds of emails going back and forth between them, even after he got his sweetheart deal. So there's a lot of explaining to do on that.
Lisa, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your reaction, the reaction of the community with us today.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Auntie.
That is Lisa Phillips. She survived years of abuse by Epstein, and she joined us today from Los Angeles. Again, thank you.